5 young men, one snowy February night, and a disappearance that still defies logic. Their car was found abandoned. The engine was running, gas was in the tank, but there was no trace of them anywhere. And when the body of one of them finally surfaced months later, it only deepened the nightmare. What really happened to the Yuba County Five? Stay with me, because this story is about to get darker, stranger, and more heartbreaking than you can possibly imagine. It all began on the night of February 24th, 1978. 5 friends, Gary Mathias, Bill Sterling, Jack Madruga, Jack Hewitt, and Ted Wire, were on their way to a basketball game at Chico State University in Northern California. They never made it home. Days later, searchers found their Mercury Montego abandoned deep in the Plums National Forest, far from any logical route back to Yuba City. The car was in perfect working order. No flat tires, plenty of gas, the keys missing, but the doors unlocked. Snow blanketed the wilderness. Nighttime temperatures dropped below freezing, but there was no sign of the 5 men, no tracks leading away, no footprints, just silence and frozen trees. Months passed. Then came the first grisly discovery. Ted Wire's body was found in a remote U.S. Forest Service trailer about 20 yards from where the car had been abandoned. He was wrapped tightly in sheets, his shoes off, his beard long, indicating he had survived for weeks. The food and supplies were inside the trailer, yet they remained untouched. Why didn't he save himself? What about the others? How did 5 men end up trapped in one of the most desolate places in California? And why did only one body surface? Today, we're going to uncover the depressing mystery of the Yuba County Five. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll have more questions than answers. Before the tragedy, before the gruesome headlines and the unanswered questions, they were just 5 young men living simple, hopeful lives in Yuba City, California. They weren't famous. They weren't troubled. They were sons, brothers, friends, good people with their own problems, but also dreams like everyone else. First, there was Gary Mathias, age 25. Gary had been battling schizophrenia for years. He had been honorably discharged from the U.S. Army after his mental health deteriorated. But recently, things had improved. Medication kept his symptoms under control, and he was beginning to rebuild his life. He exercised, spent time with friends, and dreamed of getting a steady job. Then there was Jack Madruga, 30. Jack had never been formally diagnosed with a disability, but he had a low IQ and often needed structure and routine to navigate everyday life. He was fiercely independent, despite serving in the U.S. Army and working hard to buy his prized possession, a turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego. Jack was quiet, dependable, and always looked out for his friends. Bill Sterling, 29, was the life of the party. He had a mental retardation and lived with his parents. Bill was deeply religious, loved to visit the library, and had a warm, gentle nature. His kindness was genuine, and his family adored him. Jack Hewitt, the youngest, 24, had learning disabilities and lived a joyful, innocent life under the loving care of his family. Jack had a childlike enthusiasm for everything, especially hanging out with his best friends. He loved nature, sports, and laughter. And finally, Ted Wire, 32. Ted had a mild mental retardation, but this never got in the way of his bright, outgoing personality. He was friendly, helpful, and loved volunteering with the Special Olympics. Ted loved sports and spent hours watching and discussing basketball with his friends. Together, they were inseparable. Their bond was something pure, a deep friendship built on trust, acceptance, and loyalty. To each other, they weren't outcasts. They were brothers. Weekends meant they'd pile into Jack's Mercury Montego, grab snacks, go to basketball games, or spend hours at the movies. They supported each other in ways few outsiders could see. They cheered each other on, protected each other, and laughed at jokes only they could understand. Their families were proud of them, proud of the independence they'd achieved, proud of the good choices they'd made, and proud of the goodness of their hearts. They weren't reckless. They weren't rebellious. They were dependable, responsible, and above all, deeply loved. February 24th, 1978 should have been another normal, happy day. 5 friends were excited. They were heading to Chico State University, about 50 miles north, to watch a college basketball game. It was the eve of their own Special Olympics basketball tournament, an event they had been training and dreaming about for weeks. The excitement was real. Ted had even laid out his Gateway Gator uniform the night before, folding it neatly so it would be ready. Bill was proudly telling his family about the tournament, imagining himself as a medal winner. Their coaches and families had high hopes for them. They left together in Jack's Mercury Montego in the early evening. Everyone was smiling and in high spirits. They had planned to watch the game, grab a bite to eat, and head home early to get a good night's sleep before their big day. There was no arguing, no sign of trouble, just 5 friends heading out into the night for a road trip that was supposed to be simple, easy, and memorable. But somewhere, something went wrong, terribly wrong. And within a few hours, 5 families began living out a nightmare that would last for decades. It all started as a night of simple joys. On February 24th, 1978, the Yuba County Five, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Ted Wire, Jack Hewitt, and Gary Mathias, piled into Jack's beloved 1969 Mercury Montego and headed to Chico, California. They had one goal: to watch a college basketball game at Chico State University. Their own Special Olympics tournament was the next day, and going to the game was a way to get inspired. The game in Chico ended around 92. Afterward, the 5 friends went into Bear's Market, a local grocery store, and bought snacks, Hostess cookies, chocolate milk, soda, and candy bars. The clerk remembered them vividly. They were cheerful, ordinary, nothing out of the ordinary. Around 9:20-30, they left the store and headed home into the night. At least, that's what everyone thought. But something went terribly wrong. When the families woke up the next morning and realized the boys had not returned home, panic set in immediately. These were not teenagers who might decide to stay out late. These were men with special needs who valued their routine. Their absence, without calling, without showing up for their tournament, was completely out of character. The search began immediately. The car was found fairly quickly. A ranger found the Mercury Montego on a lonely, narrow mountain road near the Plums National Forest, about 70 miles northeast of Chico, well off the route they would take back to Yuba City. It had been abandoned. The doors were unlocked. One window was down. There were no keys inside, but strangely, the car itself was in good condition. It was not stuck in the snow. It could easily be rolled back down the road. There was no sign of a struggle, no damage to the car. Nothing had been stolen. The snacks they had bought still lay half-eaten on the seats. The question was immediate and chilling. Why had they driven on this lonely mountain road? Jack Madruga was known to hate the cold and the wilderness. He would never willingly drive on a dirt mountain road at night, especially in winter. Even more puzzling was the fact that the dirt road near where the car was found led deeper into the wilderness. Tracks, possibly consistent with the group's shoes, were seen leading from the car into the snow-covered woods, but the tracks soon disappeared under a fresh snowfall, leaving few clues. Were they lost? Had someone lured them off the highway? They panicked when the car stopped and decided to walk into the freezing night. It didn't make sense. Temperatures that night dropped below freezing. The wilderness around them was harsh and unfamiliar. The police were baffled. Families were desperate, combing the area, posting flyers and pleading for information. Helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights scanning the endless snow-covered wilderness. Search dogs were brought in, sniffing the icy ground for any sign of the missing men. Dozens of volunteers trudged through snowdrifts and dense forests, calling out the boys' names. For days, search parties trudged through sub-zero temperatures and harsh terrain. But there was nothing. No bodies, no clothes, no supplies, no trace other than a few faint footprints near the abandoned car. It was as if the 5 men had simply vanished into thin air. Authorities dug deeper. They traced the trail from Chico to the lonely dirt road, step by step. They combed through the boys' pasts, looking for anything that might explain why they might have taken to the mountains. But nothing made sense. Neither boy was an outdoorsman. They were unfamiliar with the rugged wilderness where the car was found, and their families swore they would never willingly leave the safety of a car for the inhospitable woods in the middle of a freezing February night. And then strange clues began to appear, adding to the confusion. One local man came forward with a chilling statement. He said he saw a group of people, possibly matching the description of the boys, near the abandoned car the night they disappeared. But when pressed for details, he became vague. He couldn't identify them for sure. Were they really the Yuba County Five or just random travelers lost in the night? There was no way to know. Then came the anonymous phone call. The police got a tip, a voice giving them cryptic directions, saying they would find the missing boys if they searched a certain area. Excited but cautious, investigators followed the lead, but it came to nothing. Another dead end. Another crushing blow. Meanwhile, whispers and rumors spread throughout Yuba County. Some said the boys had been kidnapped. Others whispered of drugs, cults, or violence. Some even speculated that Gary Mathias, who had a history of schizophrenia, had suffered a psychotic break and led them into danger. But again, there was no evidence of this. The only thing investigators were certain of was that the Mercury Montego could have easily left the area. The car wasn't stuck. It had a quarter tank of gas. Even stranger, when police checked it over, the engine started right up. No mechanical problems, no flat tires, nothing was wrong. So why abandon it? And why leave the safety of the car to walk into the snowy darkness? Investigators were tormented by possibilities, but there were no answers. As the weeks dragged on, hope began to fade. Families who had clung desperately to the belief that their sons would be found were now haunted by grief and unresolved questions. Mothers who had once sat by the phone waiting for news now sat by the window staring into the distance. Fathers who had joined search parties returned home exhausted, broken, and empty-handed. The truth would not be revealed until June 4th, 1978. A small group of motorcyclists exploring the remote wilderness of Plum's National Forest came across something disturbing. An old Forest Service trailer, and inside, a grisly discovery. It was the body of Ted Wire, one of the 5 missing men. The trailer was about 20 miles from where their car had been abandoned, an unimaginable distance to walk through deep snow and sub-zero temperatures. But it wasn't just the location that struck investigators. It was the strange and depressing way in which Ted was found. Ted's body was lying on a bed inside the trailer. Several blankets were carefully, almost lovingly, wrapped tightly around him, including his head and shoulders, as if someone had tried to keep him warm or comfort him as he died. But he had no shoes on. His feet were badly frostbitten, frozen and blackened by the elements. Even more chilling was the fact that the trailer itself was not completely devoid of survival supplies. There were supplies inside, canned goods untouched, a fully functional gas cylinder that could have provided heating and cooking, warm winter clothing and matches, all completely unused. Authorities estimated that Ted had been in the trailer for 8 to 13 weeks before he finally succumbed to hypothermia and starvation. He had lost nearly half his body weight. His beard had grown long, a silent testament to how long he had clung to life, alone, cold, and waiting for help that never came. There were other disturbing details. A broken window suggested the men had forced it open to find shelter. But why hadn't they used the food or heat? Why had Ted, and perhaps others, chosen to slowly starve themselves instead of using what was available? It didn't add up. Investigators continued to search, and just beyond the trailer, scattered across the rugged terrain, they found more horrors. Jack Hewitt's remains were found about 2 miles away. Bones picked clean by animals but identified by dental records. Nearby, they found pieces of clothing belonging to Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga, and soon after, their skeletal remains. Bones lay scattered across snowfields, exposed to months of weather and wildlife. It seemed the group had split up after abandoning the vehicle, trying to find shelter. But only Ted had made it to the trailer, only to die a slow, helpless death despite being surrounded by everything he needed to survive. But one man was still missing: Gary Mathias. No trace of him was ever found. His shoes, oddly enough, were found inside the trailer, indicating that he had been there alive for at least some time. Some theorized that Gary had headed back into the wilderness to find help and simply never arrived. Others whispered darker possibilities that something had happened between the group, something desperate, something driven by fear, madness, or the struggle to survive. The mountain kept its secrets tightly. Families already shattered by months of uncertainty were now confronted with an even more wrenching truth. Their sons had not simply disappeared. They had suffered. They had been so close to rescue, and yet rescue had eluded them. The discovery of Ted Wire's body raised far more questions than it answered. Why hadn't they used the food? Why wasn't the gas turned on for heat? Why did they split up instead of sticking together? And worst of all, where was Gary Mathias? The Yuba County Five case, once a mysterious disappearance, had now become something even darker. A lingering, unresolved tragedy that defied logic and haunted everyone who knew their story. Now that 4 of the 5 men had been found dead and Gary Mathias was still missing, the world began to speculate. What really happened that night? The official story was simple, almost too simple. The men had somehow become disoriented after a basketball game. They had taken a wrong turn, driven into the mountains, and, confused, cold, and afraid, abandoned their car and walked into the wilderness. But that story brought no comfort to anyone who knew them. These men were not reckless. They stuck together, cared for each other. Jack Madruga, in particular, was known for being frugal with his beloved car. He would never willingly drive it along that dangerous mountain road. And even if they had gotten lost, why didn't they just turn around? Why walk 20 miles through deep snow into a lonely forest without a clear plan? And Ted's body, found neatly wrapped in blankets inside a trailer filled with untouched supplies. It didn't make sense. Other theories began to emerge. Some whispered of violence. Had they been forced off the road that night? Had a sinister figure or group lured them deep into the mountains? A chilling tale had emerged. A man who worked at a nearby hotel claimed to have heard something strange the night the men disappeared. He talked about seeing headlights and hearing whistles and screams in the woods, but by the time he investigated, there was nothing there. Were these lost boys calling for help? Or was someone or something stalking them? Rumors spread like wildfire. Some speculated that the men were running from an unseen threat, that they had been spooked and chased into the wilderness in a panic. But others noted that the Yuba County Five were known for being cautious and trusting. They wouldn't have run blind unless they truly believed their lives were in danger. Then there were the darker conspiracies. Some believed that the local population might have had something to do with it. The mountains were remote and isolated, populated by people who weren't always welcoming to outsiders. Had the 5 men stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see, a criminal network, an illegal operation hidden deep in the woods, or was it something even more personal? And then there was Gary Mathias. His disappearance sparked even more speculation. Gary, unlike the others, had a history of mental illness, schizophrenia, though he had been stable for years, carefully managing it with medication. Some believed Gary had suffered a psychotic break and led the others into the wilderness. Others believed he might have survived longer than the others and disappeared into the woods, perhaps even living somewhere isolated. Some even dared to ask, did Gary have anything to do with his friends' deaths? But again, those who knew him rejected the idea. Gary loved his friends. He had never been violent toward them. He was excited about the basketball tournament, dreaming of winning a Special Olympics medal, just like the others. And yet, his absence remained an unsolved mystery at the center of the tragedy. The facts refused to fit into one theory. If they were lost, why did they continue into the mountains instead of turning back? If they were running from something, what scared them so much that they ran into the deadly wilderness without proper clothing, supplies, or a plan? If this was a violent crime, why were there no signs of a struggle or violence? Police found no fingerprints, no blood, no evidence of violence in the car, the trailer, or anywhere in between. The case, stunning, heartbreaking, grew colder with each passing season. Yuba County, once an ordinary small town in California, was home to one of the strangest, most tragic mysteries in American crime history. Decades have passed since that cold February night in 1978. Yet the Yuba County Five remains an open wound, unresolved, unforgotten, and still as oppressive. Despite dozens of interviews, hundreds of tips, and several search expeditions, no new evidence has ever emerged to explain why Gary Mathias, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, and Ted Wire disappeared into the Plums National Forest, only to be found months later under separate, tragic circumstances. Modern forensic techniques have been applied to the remains of the case. DNA testing of recovered artifacts, reanalysis of witness statements, even ground-penetrating radar in key locations. But the central mystery remains. The families of the five men have spent their lives searching for clarity. Some, like Ted Wire's mother, return to that lonely trailer every year on the anniversary, leaving fresh flowers on the doorstep, hoping for a sign. Others, like Gary Mathias's younger sister, have joined online communities dedicated to solving cold cases, posting age-graded sketches and poring over satellite images. Some have quietly accepted that answers may never come, carrying their grief in private memorials and silent remembrances. The disappearance has left an indelible mark on Yuba City. Locals still whisper their theories about what happened. Was it a tragic navigational error, a mental breakdown, or something more sinister? An incomprehensible crime that took the lives of 5 defenseless young men. Every year, regional newspapers publish stories about the story. Podcasts revisit the case, offering new interviews. True crime fans make a pilgrimage to the old bus stop on Aspen Road, leaving flowers and mementos. But every theory is crushed by the same stubborn facts. The car was abandoned with the keys in the ignition. The trailer was left untouched, and Gary Mathias's boots were found inside, though he was nowhere to be found. The physical evidence refuses to add up, leaving only questions. Why did they abandon a functioning vehicle for a dangerous trek into the frozen wilderness? Why didn't Ted and the others use the life-saving resources in the trailer? What happened to Gary Mathias? Did he escape on his own, only to disappear forever? These questions echo through time, unanswered. The story of the Yuba County Five remains more than just a cold case. It is a testament to the fragility of human plans in the face of the inexorable forces of nature and mystery. And while those questions linger, their story will continue to captivate, confound, and haunt anyone who dares to ask, what really happened that night? What do you think happened to the Yuba County Five? Share your theories in the comments below. If you find these kinds of unsolved mysteries fascinating, please like and subscribe, because sometimes the journey to the truth is the most compelling story of all. Ultimately, the Yuba County Five remains an enigma, a puzzle with missing pieces that may never be found. More than 40 years later, there is still no definitive answer. Were they simply lost in the night, victims of a fatal navigational error and the unforgiving winter wilderness? Or was there something darker at work? An unseen hand that led them from safety to despair. Their families still feel the pain of unresolved questions. Some hope that one day Gary Mathias's whereabouts will be revealed. that the full story will be brought to light. Others have found some peace in embracing the mystery, honoring their loved ones, not for how they went, but for the lives they lived and the bond that held them together. Today, we remember the 5 men who laughed together, dreamed together, and disappeared together. Gary, Jack Madruga, Bill, Jack Hewitt, and Ted. They were sons, brothers, friends, volunteers, teammates. Their hopes were simple: to belong, to compete, to be seen for who they were. And though their story ended tragically, their legacy lives on in every whisper of the pines and every footprint on that lonely mountain road. If their disappearance teaches us anything, it's that lives can change in an instant, and that the search for the truth is never truly over. The wild may hold its secrets, but our memories keep their story alive. What do you think happened to the Yuba County Five? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because together we keep their memory alive, and maybe someone out there will find the answers they deserve.